Hey, listeners, get ready to transform your career and finances. In 2025, join us for the Health and Wealth Expo retreat in February and then the Live Expo in May. Save the dates for two powerful experiences that will transform your career, finances, and well-being. Mark your calendars now. Welcome to Nurses with Voices. I'm Dr. Lindra, your host and fellow nurse who's traded in burnout for breakthroughs. I'm here to show you how to transform your nursing career into one filled with purpose, reduce stress, and incredible opportunities. Whether you're looking to start your own business, build generational wealth, or simply find a healthier role in nursing, this podcast is for you. Join me to explore practical strategies to overcome burnout, combat bias, and chart new paths in nursing. It's time to reclaim your voice and reimagine your future in healthcare. Let's get started. Welcome back to another episode of Nurses with Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Lindra, and today I have Maggie Ortiz. Maggie is a fellow nursepreneur with two businesses. She has a career in nursing that spans over 2 decades. Maggie actually has left the bedside and is now pursuing her law degree. I know this is just going to be a great conversation. Every time I speak with her, she's just a ball of laughs. And so I want her to go ahead and introduce herself to you and just talk a little bit about your nursing journey and what led you to law school.
Sure. So like you alluded to, I've been a nurse for 2 decades. I started with my associate's degree, which I am proud to say. So, hoorah to those who hold, an associate's degree. It was my start, and I left home at an early age. And so nursing provided me with, a base. I did practice in a hospital setting primarily, started in an ICU. I went on to go into ER, pre-op, PACU, endo, IR, cath lab, structural heart, EP, agency, float pool, travel. So clearly I've done a lot of things. I like to joke and say everywhere but L&D, and you can be for sure that was my choice. And no hate. I love these people, right? I have 3 kids, but I'm not cut like that. I've been part of the code team. I've taught ACLS, BLS. I did spend time briefly out of border nursing where I did learn how to use the rules and regulations that dictate our professional practice and basically use those against a nurse who there was a complaint filed within a governing agency. I had to learn that intimately. I did do some national training. I left that agency. I then became, what most people know to be like a legal nurse consultant or an expert witness, a legal nurse, in that realm. So I have been deposed. I've testified outside of an agency. So I've had that experience, and then have been helping primarily lawyers and nurses across the United States who are under investigation. Because I had some experience within an agency, I did see some things that not only I am concerned about, but many people across the United States as it pertains to due process and our license when a nurse is under investigation.
Wow. So you've said a lot, and I'm intrigued by all of it. So just backing up to, you did some work with the Board of Nursing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So when every state has a structure that's set up to provide licensure to a nurse, that could be like my structure is a traditional border nursing. Depending on what your state that is, will dictate. And I hope that you know this. Please, if you don't, you need to make sure you're introducing yourself to that right now. Whether you're under HHS, Health and Human Services, Department of Health, the ALJ, right? I have a traditional border nursing. So when you have a license, there are rules and regulations that dictate your ability to practice. So most of us don't oftentimes do like that. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I had all those, memorized, nor was I able to speak like I am today. So I went into that agency to learn how to investigate a nurse if a complaint was filed by a patient, an organization. Anyone can file a complaint to a governing agency whenever you hold a professional license. Not unique to us, nursing, MD, teacher, it doesn't matter, whomever holds a professional license. And every agency has a process set up to investigate that license holder. So I was there. So if a complaint came in, I fell under enforcement. So I did hold a badge. I had a badge, so that meant that I could go if a nurse was intentionally harming a patient, let's just say, then I had to triage that. And then, of course, I would have to leave. Never had to do that because I was there for a short period of time. But an investigator does have that ability because the agency is set up to protect the public and not the nurse. That's not their mission. The mission of every governing agency is their duty, their mission is the public and not us. So then I had to learn that process. I know I'm getting into a lot of the weeds here, so please stop me if you have a question in the interim. So the complaint comes into the board, comes to the investigator. The investigator looks at it, generates I'm just specifically speaking about my board. Every state is different. Sent the nurse allegations on or about this day. This is what you did. Tell me what your response is within 30 days, then asking you some other brief things, a questionnaire, some of your work history, and then asking for your response. Then there's a whole process when you're under investigation from complaint to maybe a trial, depending on that's dictated by what the nurse wants to do. The nurse dictates, or the board, I guess, depending on the allegation made by the nurse. Again, if the nurse is intentionally harming a patient, then the board would have to move against them, right? And so the nurse may not be able to dictate some of that, but the nurse oftentimes would get an allegation, give the response, then agreed orders. And I know I'm going into a lot and I'm going down to, and this is where I know I'm a lot, but it would start with the allegation. Then they would get agreed orders. So the board is now saying you did do this. We know you did it, or here's some stuff, or, like I told you about some of the stuff I do have concerns about that process because oftentimes the nurse wasn't even given their full and complete file. So how can you respond to allegation? You know what I mean? That was a year ago. That was 3 months ago. Do you know what you had yesterday for breakfast? A lot of stuff that I do is about education, oftentimes for the nurse. Just saying, number one, what does it mean? And because they're the first thing that they're fearful of, I'm going to lose my license. Everyone thinks that they're going to go, it's going to be right to redonda. And that's a rare instance. Oftentimes, yes, a nurse will have to fully go through the process, but more likely than not, they're not going to get their license revoked. They may be punished. They may have to go on the peer assistance program, but more often than not, it's going to be, fines, some education, and that they are going to hold on to that license.
But this stays on their license. So any complaint.
A complaint is always confidential. So no one gets to know about that but the nurse and the person who filed the complaint. So then that's what I tell the nurse. So let's put that aside. Now, if you signed your agreed orders, that's a different situation. Then yes, that is put on what you are referencing as nurses for life, and that will always have to be disclosed. So a complaint always kept confidential. The complaint then would go through the process. If it's unfounded, then that complaint ideally would be dropped. Then no, that never goes anywhere. You would never have to disclose that, even when you're under an investigation by a board of nursing. That is confidential. That is a common question that I got asked as the investigator, if they had to disclose it, not unless you're charged, which again, I know I'm getting into some of these nuances, but this is why I develop out education. This is why I try to, I am trying to create some courses, even for organizations, even for school, because this is where I find where nurses get into trouble, even sometimes the lawyers, that's why I'm seeking out, pursuing a law degree, because if they're not a nurse and they are a lawyer, some of these things I do explain to them as well. And I'll go to whatever board, tell me your state. Okay. And I'll go to, there's only 3 different sections that I'm going to look at. I'm going to look at standards of practice, unprofessional conduct, and then grounds for discipline. That's going to start where I'm going to look at. And every state is more often than not going to have that. And there's going to be thousands of pages. So then I'll go specifically to that. And then I'll start looking at the rules and regulations there. And then I'll help to educate the nurse and oftentimes the lawyer. And then that I may even say, look, it says that, okay, there was a medication error, but what they're asking is like to put on diversion, or they're offering up this could be tied to patient abuse. So let's offer up this violation. And this may keep the nurse off of, I know I'm going to go down another rabbit hole, but sorry, but it could keep them off of a national practitioner database that you do see on N.U.R.S.E. So let's go back to N.U.R.S.E. So you go to N.U.R.S.E, so it's NURSYS.com for those of you who don't know, and it is a national database that a nurse can be looked on, even for verification of your license. It can be just that. If you're getting hired for a job, that's where they go to look. But then if you do have discipline, and once it's gone through the whole process and the order is ratified. So ratification means that the board said, yes, this is law. You signed your orders. We signed your orders. We met at our quarterly meeting and we passed this into, law. These are your agreed orders. Then that gets released to this national database for referencing, which is called N.U.R.S.E. Then your orders can be seen by anyone. Then let's go back to what I was saying. So now your orders are there. Those orders and those violations that I talked about can generate National Practitioner Database Codes, or NPDB. You will see that, like, let's just talk about redondas. You go to hers, that National Practitioner Database hyperlink that is there now is to patient abuse. So do you think that you're ever going to work as a nurse if that is the violation? And that's a common sense argument, right? Where do you think that you're going to be able to be employed? And you can, and these nurses do. I don't want to be Debbie Downer, but it may make it a lot harder for you because you have to be bonded. Now I'm going down another rabbit hole, but you'll have to be bonded as a nurse. We have to work with the vulnerable population, which means that we have to have professional liability insurance. So you may not realize when you clock into your W-2, you're bonded. You are bonded.
So let's talk about that, because you're using terms that people may not be familiar with. So when you're saying orders and when you say bonded, can you just explain to the listeners like what you are referring to?
Sure. So your agreed orders will be basically the discipline that you agree to. The Board of Nursing just said that, let's say you gave the wrong medication. You gave the wrong medication. You committed, you did this. So these are the violations. And now you're going to have discipline. You're going to take education. You're going to have fines. You're going to have to work in a place where there's a nurse. You're not going to work home health. You're not going to work day, or you're going to have to work days. You can't work hospice. There'll be stipulations that you agree to in the orders because you violated the Nurse Practice Act and the standards of care when there was a medication error. And so that generates your agreed orders. And then because of those agreed orders and the violations that could be tied to those could end you up on a list where, like, the National Practitioner Database, and now I'm getting some weeds that I'm not as familiar with that stuff as I am administrative law, but that's tied to codes that basically is tied to the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare. I mean, for us, that's like huge. So it can link you to codes and violations that you may not be able to bill for insurance. And now you're a nurse practitioner. Now you know what I mean? So which can then tie you to, it would be no different. I think people understand the better analogy when I say, if you get a DUI and now you still want to drive, now you have to get this high risk insurance that everyone knows about, right? It's the XP300 that your insurance companies, yes, we were more than happy to let you drive, but now you have to go on this $5 million insurance. Now extend that to the business. Now, do you think that your job or your employer, sure, they're going to come to you and say, hey, yes, we would love for you to hire Maggie, but holy moly. So do you know, we looked her up. And so she's got some codes tied to her that are going to cause our deductible to go to $5 million. And while we would love to have her, are you willing to take on that financial? So that's in the back of the house. Oftentimes that nurses have no idea about that's happening. And so when I get involved with my advocacy and my education, when we sit down and we're talking, and whether the law firm has hired me or the nurses reach out to me, we're talking about some of these violations and possibly offering some of those different ones up that could steer a nurse away from some of these, abuse or neglect NPDB codes.
Talk a little bit about Advocates for Nurses so that the listeners understand exactly what you do.
A lot of education and support. Because oftentimes when a nurse gets a letter from a board of nursing, it's like cancer, and they're scared, they don't know what to do. So then we start unpacking that. Number one, do you have professional liability insurance? Then when you, because I'm not a lawyer and I never provide legal advice, and we need to be reaching out to legal counsel. So I provide education, resources. I can be a legal expert or consultant. I've testified for nurses in cases. Again, not it's always unbiased. If a nurse deviates from the standard of care, you got to own it. You deviate from the standard of care, right? But let's unpack that. No one's perfect. Let's talk about some mitigating circumstances. And then again, that's where I offer up to the attorney as someone who's worked and we led with all my experience. That alone is oftentimes a gift to an attorney, because I've drafted up reports before, because I've been with an agency. I start with, what is a Pyxis? What is an Omnicell? Where did that drug even originate? Because the attorney is just like, I'm so sorry, what is that? And I may understand nuances tied to that. Like, there's video. I want to see the video. And they're like, what do you mean a video? I was like, well, the Pyxis has a video, or there's video in hallways. I know no, nuances that the legal team may not know. And that's what an expert does, brings that in. So, in the advocates piece of it, in my business, I do education, I provide resources, not only for nurses under investigation, but what I don't want is a nurse to come to me with a letter. So I've created online education, charting courses, mentorship, whatever you need, because that's the last place I want you to end up. But if you end up there, I'm more than happy to help you, with resources, support. Sometimes a nurse just needs to know that they're not alone and they need to put down some of that, because there is some shame tied to that. And I don't want you to feel like that. I want you to know that you're not alone and it's going to be okay. And there's a nurse that in my subscription that I highlighted. She's been sober for 2 decades and she got her license revoked, and now she's back to practicing because she's been sober for 2 decades. Right? You're never alone. So whatever resource you need, depression is real, PTSD is real. So let's talk about your mental health and how to prevent you from being investigated for fitness to practice. So a lot of it's unique. It's oftentimes tailored to the nurse that comes to me, I guess, is the long and short of it. Wherever they're at, I really do try to meet them where if I can't help you, then I'm going to help you find the resource. You have a workman's comp case. Well, let's get you to someone. There are lawyers that are RNs that do that. So let's get you to a nurse who does this. So then I try to just meet the nurse where they're at.
So, in this one business, or is that your other business as well? Is this one business you work with nurses who have received a letter from the Board of Nursing, and you also work with courses and mentorships to prevent nurses from receiving a letter from the Board of Nursing? Is that what I'm understanding that you do within Advocates for Nursing?
Yes.
And what's your other business?
So the first business that I created was Action Nurse Service, because early on when we talked out, my first crossover as an entrepreneur was as a legal nurse consultant. I was an expert nurse, so I couldn't take money as Maggie Ortiz. You can, but that that's not a responsible decision to make. And so I created Action Nurse Services because that was my first entrepreneur crossover.
Okay, that was into legal nurse consulting, which led you to Advocates for Nursing and now to law school. That's awesome. I think that's so amazing. I think nurses make the best lawyers. I'm thinking about healthcare law. I'm thinking about politics, right? Because there's a lot of this is politics. And you mentioned that there were some things that you saw that were unethical in one of your positions, which led you to want to go to law school. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the lack of due process that I feel like under administrative law in general. So, administrative law in every state is a license. So again, back to teachers, MDs, PTs, OTs, we all are practicing under like administrative law. So just the way that that's written, and then the way that boards are set up in general across the United States, there's a lack of due process. And I don't want to get into nuances, and I haven't been able to read the dissent from the Supreme Court case that was just overturned, the Chevron case. But I do believe that's going to open up again. I don't think I'm real happy about this, because there has to be some oversight, but that may open up someone the ability to look at some of these processes as they are written under administrative law as they dictate our license, because the way that they're written right now, I do not feel that they, always extend the nurse due process. One of the things I led with, like, if you get a complaint, an allegation, and it was 6 weeks ago, it was 3 months ago, it was 6 months ago, and you're asked to give your response to something that could affect your livelihood for your life, and all you get is an allegation and you're asked to respond within 30 days, that wouldn't happen under civil criminal law. So why is it acceptable under administrative law? So how is that due process? So one of the things that attorneys most already know, that they will not allow a nurse to respond. They will want the full and complete file, but some attorneys don't ask for that. Some nurses just, in our innate, nature as want to be compliant, we just start talking, and I'm like, whoa, you don't even know what they're referencing. How could you possibly know? Well, you don't have the medical record. So that right there is one of the things that I feel like, you know, needs to be addressed. Some states addressed where they don't, where the allegations are not drafted originally. Depending on what is said, the nurse has just reached out to say, hey, will you talk to us? Someone sent us a complaint and we need to figure out what's going on. Not written allegations yet. So an official investigation is not open yet, but the nurse should be able to see something. Again, this was 6, 8 weeks ago. Now you're calling me down. This is causing me anxiety, right? And most nurses won't get legal representation. So I feel like that piece alone, if you can have at least the medical record, something they're referencing. So I do feel like that is a lack of due process and an unethical practice that nurses don't even realize that they're being blindsided with.
It makes me think about a recent incident with a nurse. And like the long and short of it is, we are very susceptible to losing our licenses, and we have to be very careful about what we express in the public, what we share, especially with today with social media. There was an incident, and I don't have all of the details, so I can't speak intelligently to it, but there was a nurse practitioner who was caught on camera, and it's like all on social media. And she got into an argument with
I know the case. I've been sent this a
yeah,
hundred times. Yes, I've seen some, but like you said, I won't touch on it because I too have to be careful, and I don't know all the story. Her license does not say revoked. It does appear that they are looking
inactive.
into, yes. So that, to me, as a prior investigator, they triaged the situation and said, let's have a
Hmm.
look at it. Now, there doesn't show that her license has been revoked, but I'm going to double down. Why are you going? Don't argue with the patient ever. B, always imagine that you're on camera. And if you saw what I
Yeah,
put on my social media, I was like, always assume you're on camera. And then the
right.
other thing, doubling down, I think there were some also alluding, again, I can't speak totally and, intelligently to this, alluding that she was a doctor, and doubling down on some of the stuff that even in the free handout that I'm providing is that please be very, very careful as a nursepreneur when you're out there using nurse and whatever it is that you're doing and tying yourself to stuff that's not within your scope of practice, because who does the medical board have a duty to protect? The public. And so who may have reported her, because again, if she put MD behind her name, again, some of the stuff
Hmm.
again that I saw that was sent to me, if we're referencing the same case, you cannot do any of that at all.
And I bring that up only to say that you have your extreme cases and then you have your not so extreme cases. And we just have to be very, very, very careful just in our day to day. I know I see sometimes nurses online and they're at work and they have their badges showing and they're on social media, and
That's called stealing time. I am going to interrupt you. I hate to interrupt, but let
that's
me just
okay.
double down on that. And when I see that, it makes me crazy, because then I also remind them, you just gave their lawyers a gift, because you just
Hmm.
recorded that timestamped date with your badge on, and they're going to go look to see when you were clocked in. And please tell me you were on your 30-minute break when that happened, because if you are not, that is literally the definition of stealing time, my friend. Do not
Right,
do this.
right.
Why are you recording on your phone at your job? Get out of town.
Look, we
No.
we have enough to worry about as nurses. Oh, I love that you're teaching documentation. Documentation is, and I know it's that age-old saying is that's what's going to save you. That needs to be more of what we're worrying about instead of, being on the clock and recording ourselves. on social media.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. It's just, we have enough to worry about. And you worked hard for your license. You went to school. Nursing school was not easy. Let me tell you, I did it over 20 years ago, and it's something that I don't ever want to do again. I have an ADN, and I don't want to have, I would never, as hard as I worked for that, I would never, ever, ever want to do that again. So I know how hard each and every nurse works for, and we have to make sure that we're fighting for it. And it's great that there's companies like you who advocate for nurses, who really just want nurses to stay on track, have the right mindset, and make sure you're appropriately taking care of your license. Because we always scream, my license, my license. Oh, I'm not going to take that extra patient because of my license. You're putting my license at jeopardy. Well, what about when you're putting your own license at jeopardy when doing certain things and with certain behaviors? So we have to be very, very careful, because I know we like to throw that around, our license, our license. Yes, you did work hard for it, but you have to know what your resources are, and we have to like work smart. We really, really, really do in our community, because to your point, a lot of the resources, or the guidelines, I should say, the regulations are for the community. We have to make sure that we're advocating for ourselves. And then we know about places like Advocates for Nurses that we can go to for resources. So I love that you are able to provide that resource for nurses. And it's interestingly enough, legal nurse consulting was actually one of my first crossover into business as well. And it really just aligned with where I was coming from out of leadership. But is there anything else that you want to share with the listeners? I know you said that you have a free gift for them, and I love that. But tell me anything else that I didn't ask that you want to share with the listeners that they should know.
Well, anyone can reach out to me. You're never alone. That you can book time on my calendar. I have free downloads as well. There's 4 of them in conjunction to what I created for, your audience as well. And the professional liability insurance, if I didn't say it, please introduce yourself to that. I know that organizations, have, insurance, and I hear nurses say this all the time. It is one of those things that I feel like is very a culture thing that's not very good at all, saying that you don't need professional liability insurance. Yeah, you do. Because if it's you and the organization, tell me about that. And you're the one that caused error. Remember, it could be human. And now, who do you think is cutting that lawyer's check, or that lawyer works for the hospital? So is that, or is that not a conflict of interest? Now, and just whatever you take away from that, but this is like a Starbucks a month situation. You can call your own car insurance or home insurance. They're more than happy to take your money. And you just say, do you underwrite for professional liability insurance? I'm a nurse. Then I would also want you to say, do you underwrite for LPN expert, RN expert, NP, CRNA, whatever your modality is? You need to make sure that they would underwrite for a nurse expert to be able to be called in your defense to give their opinion, to opine. So if they don't underwrite for that, that's at your dollar. And you and I can tell them how much we make an hour when we are asked to be an expert. So, I mean, it's not cheap. More than happy to do it, but you want to make sure that that professional liability insurance, that's what the action nurse service is, right? Because we are 1099s when we do that. Most of the time that's coming from some insurance or the law firm, right, as a check. So get your professional liability insurance, then it's very affordable. There are plenty out there. I don't have one specifically to reference. Like I said, you start with your own home or car insurance. So then that just makes it that layer even easier. You're not even have to reinvent the wheel, call your agent. No one wants to do 100 different steps. So just start there. And then, yes, like you said, what will be when I was working at the Board of Nursing and when I've been a civil expert, and this, what are the first things that subpoenaed? The medical record. What you did or did not document, I promise you. And so when I teach the charting course, it's not just about the documentation. It's who owns the medical record. I read the definition of medical negligence. I read the definition of gross negligence, because those are 2 different things. And your organization does not have to cover you. Sometimes if you deviate so grossly, so that's called willful wanton, then I read that as well, because nurses need to understand what that means. And then I talk about what that professional liability, that's called respondent superior, when you're covered under the hospital or the organization. And we talk about that. And then I give some examples about fall, a soapy note. There's a 16-page handout because you know I clearly love a handout because education is my thing. And then you also get a CE. So I did make sure I got that for you too as well. And it's all online now. So whether you're 2 a.m. or 2 p.m., you don't have to wait for me to teach it. But I don't want a nurse to come to me with a letter, right? So I took the time to create that resource because if you take it and your documentation changes, your practices when your organization changes, that may prevent you from ever coming to me, right? I'm tired of the band-aids, right? That's why I'm pursuing law school, because I have to go upstream, because I want to start changing some things. I'm more than happy to help support the nurse, but how can I stop that? Please, when you come to me, if you say you didn't document it, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. I mean, we're going to work through it, baby girl, baby boy, but it's just going to make it a little bit more difficult. So if your documentation is sound, then it's like, my God, then I'm glowing and I'm proud. Yeah, yeah. And then we're done. Then we're done. And it's a gift. So I think that's all I got. I think that's it. I think that's enough.
Well, thank you, Maggie. Thank you so much. How much longer do you have in law school?
Oh, I just took the test, so I don't start till next year. So
Oh, well, listen,
I got 3 years.
kudos
So
to you.
5 years. I'm 50. I'm on a 5-year plan. So by the time I'm 55, I'll have my practice developed out, and it will be more at changing big, big rules and not messing, you know what I mean? Because I just want some of
Yeah,
the due process stuff, because that's my biggest concern. I just want I want my
that's
people to
me.
just show up and do their job and have the resources available to them.
I love it. I love it. Well, where can people find you?
So I don't keep nothing crazy. Advocates for Nurses, it's all the same. If you see my
Okay.
logo, there it is. Advocates number 4 or FOR. I'm on every social media platform out there. TikTok is the one that took off literally. I don't know why, but it's not even the one I'm the best at. So all these platforms, I try to provide some gold nuggets. And I love when a nurse comes back to me and says, my unit have changed because I followed some of your stuff. I give them the
Oh,
words, the language, because sometimes it is like you said, they don't know how to say, I can't accept this unsafe assignment. So I take it down to the words. You can. It's not on you. It's on the board of nursing. Absolve yourself
right.
of it, baby. It's not you.
Yeah.
So when they reach out to me and say, my life has changed because of you, or I left my unit and I go into another unit and it's way better. And I'm like, I'm so happy. That's what I want for
Move.
you.
I love
Yes.
that. Move. If you're not happy where you are, move. You do not. Gone are the days when people are staying on units for 10 and 15 and 20 years anymore. Move.
It's not sometimes you can stay within that hospital because you live in a rural area. You can't move somewhere. Well, how do you know that labor and delivery is not your unit? How do you
Yeah.
know it's not somewhere else? Sometimes
Right.
you can stay within that organization. You and I both know. I've worked in ERs that were horrible, and then I moved over to the cath lab, and it was great. I loved the team. Sometimes it
Right.
is just the unit, oftentimes due to leadership. So you do have choices even within your own organization. So I like to
Yeah.
just put that stuff out there. So every social media platform, give away a lot of free stuff. You can book time with me, and I'm more than happy to set up time with you, and we can, but I do charge for some of those services, and I'm, more than happy to deep dive into whatever it is that you need and meet you where you're at.
All right, great. Well, awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on today. This has been wonderful. All right, guys, until next time, make sure you stay inspired, stay educated, and stay empowered.